Tragedy today in a residential Kansas City neighborhood.
A family has been thrust into disbelief as they discovered their 16-year-old daughter dead in her own bed this morning.
No one heard Fawn scream that night, and the killer knew how to sneak in the second-floor bedroom.
In the middle of the night, in her home, the place she should have been the safest, with her family sleeping just a few feet away from her, someone had killed Fawn Cox. 31 years of investigations, dead ends, and questionable tips would finally uncover the truth. The killer had been there all along.
The answers aren't always what we were asking for, but there's closure.
Welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome to the back of the archive. If you enjoy true crime stories, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Today we're opening the files to a cold case that took over 3 decades to solve. The murder of a teenage girl at the hands of who she least expected. This is the case of Fawn Cox. Fawn Cox was born on March 24, 1973, and lived in Kansas City, Missouri. The Cox family lived in a small 2-story house. They weren't the most financially stable, and like many other families, often struggled to make ends meet in the working-class neighborhood they lived in. A typical teenager, Fawn lived as ordinary a life as you would expect her to. Her day-to-day life consisted of school, work, and friends. Fawn was also an avid swimmer in high school. She loved being in the water and was a talented athlete. She also had many close friends. But she was the eldest of 3 sisters, and as the big sister, she was often in charge of caring for her younger siblings while her parents were working. At the age of 16 in 1989, Fawn got a summer job at a local amusement park. Her family struggled to make ends meet, so this extra income would help with expenses her parents couldn't cover, and it would also give Fawn a bit more independence, allowing her to save up for the future. All summer, Fawn sat behind the cash register and sold tickets to other families who were enjoying a day out together. That is, of course, until July 26th of 1989. After finishing her shift that evening, Fawn got home and retired to her room to get some rest. That particular night, she was the only one sleeping on the 2nd floor. One of her sisters was babysitting for some neighbors, also trying to make some extra cash. And her other sister had decided to sleep on the 1st floor along with her parents. Now, although most of the rooms were upstairs in the home, Kansas City summers can get quite hot, especially in July. And the Cox family only had one air conditioning unit, which was located downstairs. So in very hot days, the family would sleep closer to the AC and leave the hotter upstairs rooms empty. Fawn, however, like many teenagers would, liked her privacy and didn't mind sleeping in a warmer room. So that night, the family went to sleep, not even beginning to imagine what they would encounter the next morning. When 9 o'clock rolled around, different alarms were going off in the Cox house. Fawn seemed to be sleeping through hers, so her mother and younger sister made their way upstairs to wake her up. When they opened Fawn's bedroom door, they found her on the bed. However, she wasn't sleeping. She was dead. Her neck had several dark bruises, and there was no sign of life. An ambulance was quickly called, but it became apparent that Fawn had already been dead for hours. The police were called immediately, and it took them just a few moments to understand. They were dealing with a murder. A detailed inspection of the body concluded that she had died from strangulation, but she had also suffered abuse. The family was in shock. How could this have happened right under their roof? But what was more important to police? How come nobody heard anything? The house was small and the walls were paper thin. Surely a murder would have caused some of the family members to wake up. However, the fact that they were all sleeping on a different floor and blasting the AC made it hard to hear anything happening upstairs. One of Fawn's sisters had noticed the family dog seemed to be nervous during the night, but since the dog was pregnant at the time, she had thought it was simply due to this. But upon learning this, investigators believe that the dog may have heard something going on and was trying to alert the rest of the family by showing its discomfort. Investigators analyzed Fawn's bedroom, now considered the crime scene, and they mapped out the events. Whoever had broken in seemed to have used a trailer parked nearby to access an open window in an upper floor of the house. An old army cap was discovered, and none of her family members recognized it as belonging to her. Some items had been taken from inside the house, including radios, a Nintendo game console, and a stereo recorder. But other items were located outside, in front of the home, as though they had been thrown from the window, but then left behind. Investigators paid special attention to a closet in one of the other rooms on the second floor, where items seemed to be out of place, to make room for a person. Their theory was that whoever broke in had been hiding inside, waiting for Fawn and everyone else to go to sleep, knowing nobody else would come up to that floor. Several hairs were discovered at the crime scene, alongside traces of blood and semen on Fawn's bed sheets, all of which were sent to the lab for analysis. But this was 1989, a time when DNA databases were practically non-existent, and matches could take years to find, especially with no suspects in custody. Because despite having all this evidence to work with, police weren't able to come up with any leads. With nothing found through the evidence, police relied only on witnesses to move forward, and this proved to be another dead end. Nobody had seen or heard anything. A month after Fawn's murder, a witness came forward with a lot of information about 3 potential suspects, 3 local teenagers who were immediately questioned. All 3 of them denied knowing anything about the terrible night of July 26th, but some of the missing items from Fawn's house were found in one of these teenagers' home, making police suspect that they weren't telling the truth and definitely knew more than what they were telling. The teen confessed during questioning that he had indeed broken into Fawn's house that night and stolen some items, but they had not encountered Fawn in the process. Since no other connection to Fawn's murder was found, eventually this lead as well died down. In fact, the witness who had come forward later retracted their testimony, moving the investigation back to square one, where it would remain until the early 2000s. With the turn of the millennium, forensics started making huge leaps in terms of DNA. The newly founded digital era introduced national databases, and scientific advances were making it easier to single people out from years-old samples. Blood and bodily fluids had been collected from the crime scene in Fawn's case, and investigators decided to reopen the case and run some of the samples against the ever-growing CODIS database. Sadly, nothing turned up. Their next move was to collect samples from the teens who were questioned after the witness came forward. But again, none of them matched the DNA collected at the crime scene. This meant that although the teens had very likely broken into her house, there was someone else there that night. Someone who had abused and killed Fawn. The Cox family was desperate for answers. Decades later, they had no closure and had never been able to move on from that terrible night. But since the police were not able to find answers, they started looking themselves. They were doing all that they could to avoid this case from dying down. The family even launched their own fundraiser to cover the cost of more DNA analysis. However, the police mentioned they couldn't use this money to finance their case, since that would be unfair to other families who didn't have the funds to speed up investigations.
Why haven't you done advanced testing on Fawn Cox?
Yeah, it's a matter of funding. We are fighting for a solution that can serve this family, but also the families of other victims to come. I'd be very fearful of getting into a situation where if one family can pay for something and another family can't, then we worry a lot about that. We want to serve everyone equally.
So all the family could do was continue waiting for answers as the police slowly worked on cold cases. But finally, Fawn's case had a breakthrough. In late 2020, DNA analysis put a name to the samples collected 30 years earlier, and the answer they were looking for was something the family could have never imagined. The DNA matched Fawn's cousin, Donald Cox. At the time of the crime, Donald was 21 years old, and no one ever even considered his involvement. Donald had a difficult life, both before and after the crime. In his 20s and 30s, he was arrested and imprisoned for stealing and carrying illegal substances. But in 2006, he passed away, so police weren't able to question him. However, a lot of information was starting to make sense. Donald knew the house and the family, so he knew that Fawn would be asleep upstairs while the rest were downstairs. He would have used that information to his advantage, and waited in a closet until Fawn fell asleep, and then he had attacked her. What police couldn't answer was if Donald and the 3 teens who broke in that night were connected. None of them gave any additional information, nor cooperated to discover the truth, even after Donald's name was matched to the DNA found, confirming he was the killer. And without that evidence, there was nothing police could do to try and connect Donald's and their presence in that house that night, or confirm either of them other than Donald had taken part in murdering Fawn. The DNA belonged only to him. During the time he was still alive, Donald kept contact with his family, including Fawn's parents, and nobody ever suspected he was actually the one behind the terrible murder. So although the Cox family finally got the answer they were looking for after all these years, the truth was bittersweet and offered little relief to their pain. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this case interesting, and as always, feel free to comment your thoughts below, but please keep it respectful towards the victim and their family. I appreciate you being here, and I hope I'll see you in the next video.